Hello and welcome to JAMA Network Open Conversations. I'm Angel Desai, Associate Editor for JAMA Network Open. Today we are speaking with Dr. Francis Vergunst and Dr. Massimilliano Orri about association of childhood externalizing, internalizing, and comorbid symptoms with long-term economic and social outcomes. Welcome to the both of you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
To start, can I have you both please introduce yourselves?
My name is Massimilliano Orri. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at McGill University in Canada.
My name is Francis Vergunst. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Special Needs Education at the University of Oslo in Norway.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about the background of this study, and including just defining externalizing and internalizing symptoms, and also a little bit about what prompted your interest in this topic?
So economic and social outcomes, participation in society matter a lot. And surveys and polls consistently show that. And one of the things we try to do in our research is identify kids who might be, as adults, excluded from participation in economic and social spheres. So there's quite a large body of literature that shows that childhood psychiatric disorders like ADHD, conduct disorder, anxiety, depression are associated with adverse long-term economic and social outcomes. Our approach is slightly different. What we were interested in doing is, rather than looking at specific diagnoses, we look at the specific symptoms that underlie those diagnoses in population-based samples. So we're talking about symptoms like inattention, hyperactivity, aggression, opposition as a cluster of symptoms that characterize what we call externalizing problems, and anxiety, depression-like symptoms that characterize internalizing problems. So in this study, we wanted to identify children who exhibited these kinds of traits across childhood and then link those to their economic and social outcomes as measured by their tax return records in adulthood.
That's great. A really interesting study. And I want to talk a little bit more about the population in this particular study, who they were, where they came from, and also what the primary outcomes were.
So for this study, we used data from the Quebec longitudinal study of kindergarten children. So this is a great longitudinal cohort. Children were included in this cohort when they entered kindergarten, so about age 5 to 6, in 1986. So we are talking about a cohort of children born in the 1980s. And there were 3,000 children included in this study. 2,000 came from the general population, while a group of 1,000 children were oversampled for having higher and disruptive behavior. And those children were followed up, these 3,000 children, from the age of 6. Today, the cohort is still going on. And while at the beginning, the people in the cohort were interviewed, their teachers were interviewed about the behavior of the children. Now, the data from this cohort are linked with data from administrative data. For example, in this study, we used the official tax report of the Canadian government to link the information on the behavior as rated by teacher in the 80 to the official report on the income, benefit from welfare, and other social outcomes that we used in this study.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. It was so interesting to see that there's more than 30 years of follow-up data here, which is really unique about this study. Tell me, what did you find?
We found several things. One thing I should maybe just backpedal a little bit and talk about is the characterization of the childhood symptom difficulties, because that essentially, or to a large extent, determines the outcomes of the study. So we used some statistical procedures to identify children who had elevated symptoms of externalizing problems, so things like inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, aggression, and children who had elevated symptoms of internalizing symptoms like depression, anxiety. And then we also identified a group who had comorbid symptoms. So they were characterized by having high levels of externalizing and internalizing symptoms. And then there was a fourth group of children who had consistently low levels of symptoms from age 6 to 12. And then what we found when we linked those to their long-term economic and social outcomes was, first, that children who have any sort of symptoms at an elevated level across childhood have poorer economic and social outcomes across multiple domains. The group that fares particularly poorly are the children who have comorbid externalizing and internalizing symptoms. And that's true for earnings. They earn less, It's true for welfare. They're more likely to receive welfare across their adult lives. It's true for intimate partnership. They're less likely to be married or cohabiting, and they're also less likely to have children living in the household across adulthood.
I think it is important to mention about this association is that they hold even when we control for a series of other variables that we thought could be confounding the associations. So we adjust for example, the sex of the child, because we know that males are more at risk to having externalizing problems and more negative outcomes in the long term. We adjust for characteristics of the family, like the age of the parents and also the educational level. And we also adjust for the income of the household when the children were around age 4 to 5. So in this way, we want to just take into account the social transmission of this important determinant of health, which is poverty or level of well-being. Another things that we wanted to control for was the children IQ, because we know that the level of cognitive skills can be linked to later chances in life, for example, to enter higher education, to have jobs with higher income.
I can also just add, just to make the results a little bit more concrete. So when we consider earnings, we took the average earnings at age 33 to 35 years. And we found that compared to children with no or low symptoms in childhood, children who were characterized by having high levels of externalizing problems earned about $6,000 less per year than the children without symptoms. The children with internalizing symptoms earned about $8,500 less on average. And children in the comorbid group, so characterized by having both externalizing and internalizing problems, earned about $15,000 less per year. And we also estimated those costs over a 40-year working career. And that amounted to, for children with externalizing problems, they'd lose about $140,000 in earnings. Children with internalizing problems lose about $200,000, and children with comorbid problems would lose about $360,000 across their working careers.
I think some significant implications there. What do you think are some of the next potentially important or unanswered questions in this area, or things that you may be working on in the future related to this topic?
Yeah, I think that these results have implication, first of all, to the early identification of children that may need some intervention to prevent negative outcome in the long term. So what this study show is the relatively small proportion of children that have comorbid problem in childhood between 6 and 12 years of age. They are those who suffer the most in terms of economic and social outcomes. So when, for example, a pediatrician or even a school teacher are confronted with children that may show symptoms of both externalizing and internalizing problem, they may think about considering whether intervention can be adapted in this context to prevent long-term outcomes. However, I think that our knowledge is still to be developed in this area. We know that there are quite a number of, for example, school-based prevention intervention to reduce the likelihood negative outcome of those children. The children have externalizing problems. However, we don't know if these same interventions are effective with children with more complex profile of symptoms. And specifically, children have both problems in the externalizing as well as in the internalizing sphere. So this opens need to develop intervention or even test this intervention specifically with those children.
That's great. I think that's a great thought to end on. Thank you so much to the both of you for speaking with me today about this very important topic. This episode was produced by Daniel Morrow at the JAMA Network. The audio team here also includes Shelley Steffens, Lisa Harden, Audrey Foreman, and Marilyn Furkaluk. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com. I'm Angel Desai. Thanks for listening and stay safe.